Okay, so officially welcome and hello to everybody who is joining us here live. Also welcome to everybody watching this later to this webinar stroke panel talk. Couldn't quite make up my mind what I wanted to call it, on the topic of creating a safe space. So my name is Katrin Heuser. I am the director of Little Yoga Space and of Hadadi. And so kind of on one hand, I do sort of two things really. On one hand, I'm a teacher, yoga teacher and a body worker, and I work with people who live with pain, chronic conditions, anxiety, for example. And on the other hand, I train people in what I do. I train people, yoga teachers, in what I call the language of the body. That's a 60-hour training for yoga teachers on a therapeutic and trauma-informed approach to teaching yoga, or I guess my take on it anyway. And I also train people in becoming body workers and Thai massage practitioners. I am super delighted and so happy to be joined by dear friends and colleagues of mine here today. Kirsten Wilkinson, maybe give us a little wave. She's the founder and executive director of Legacy Motion and a Somatic practitioner. Legacy Motion is an NGO that offers body-based mental health programs and trainings to people impacted by trauma worldwide, and mostly in populations where this kind of support and work is not so readily available. And then a bit like me too, she also works with the individuals and has a private somatic therapy practice, and that's called Healing Motion. And then we are also joined by Amalia. If you can give us a wave. Hello, Amalia. Thank you so much for being here today. She's a licensed clinical social worker and yoga teacher, also teaching at Little Yoga Space here in Lisbon. She spent the last 10 years working with children and young adults, mostly adults of all different backgrounds and issues, and her areas of expertise mostly include attachment style based trauma and using mindfulness and somatic practices to improve relationship with themselves as well as others. And then finally we also have Hannah here. Hannah, if you want to give a little wave there. Hannah is a yoga therapist and perinatal mental health and mindfulness teacher and a yoga teacher. She also teaches at Little Yoga Space. She supports people living with psychological, emotional, neurological presentations of specific conditions, also such as anxiety, depression, PTSD, trauma, chronic pain, as well as women's health issues. And a quick side note here today to say that Hannah will be leaving a couple of minutes early before the end of the webinar. So in case you see her disappear, just to let you know that that was planned. She's not just dropping off. So I want to take a moment to say that we will be touching on the subject of trauma here today. And we very much recognize that we live in challenging times. And the invitation is for you to engage with the conversation here today as much or as little as feels okay and good for you. So that does also mean that you can press the pause button, take yourself out of the room for a while, turn your camera off. Any of those things are all very welcome. And you can always come back to the recording later on when that feels better for you. So that said, I also want to take a moment for us here to orient ourselves and ground ourselves for a moment. So I'll invite you all to maybe have a couple of deeper breaths or a little wiggle, or feel free to stretch or move where you are right now. And you can do this at any time throughout the talk today. We're here together for an hour, and sitting for an hour can get a little bit uncomfortable. And it doesn't matter how you're sitting, but see that you're comfortable, and maybe really notice your sit bones on your seat, or maybe your feet on the floor. And let's maybe take a moment to orient ourselves and look around the space that you're in. I know we're getting quite used to this whole world of Zoom, and at the same time, I still feel that a little bit disorientating. It's kind of like I'm here, but I'm also with you guys, and you're, I don't know where. And so my brain always gets a bit confused. And so I like looking around and making sure I know exactly where I am right now. And again, this is also something that you can repeat at any time during the conversation today. Good. So, yeah. Welcome to this talk, Creating Safe Space. You are very welcome to ask questions, and maybe you brought some questions along, and we'll be very happy to get to them. And I will invite you to put them into the chat. That will be for us the easiest way to manage the questions, and then we'll try our best to get to them at the end or as and when they might be appropriate. So we will be diving into kind of three main areas of the topic of creating safe space, which is really a big subject, a big deal, and warrants much more than only an hour. But we'll have a little dive into why that actually really matters. And I would say now more than ever. And we'll talk about who it actually is that we want to create a safe space for. And then also what that might look like in practical terms. And so our intention is that you'll be taking away a whole bunch of ideas of things that might be relatively easy, say relatively, to implement if you wanted to. And that will already go a really long way. So I'm going to be throwing out a few questions around those kind of three main topics, and be inviting Amalia and Kirsten and Hannah to be talking to those questions a little, and then see whether maybe that will turn into an interesting enough conversation here for the next now 50 minutes or so. Okay, so let's start talking about the challenges of the current times. And so I wonder, question here to the panel, if you've noticed anything really on the back of the challenges and events of the current times, if and how that is maybe having an impact on people's mental or even physical health. And I'm going to put this question to Kirsten first, and see whether we can get started. And obviously Amalia and Hannah, please feel free to jump in on the back of that.
Thanks, Kat. And I apologize. I am currently in South Africa, so we're having some energy issues here. So if I am slow or drop off, hopefully that won't happen, but my internet is always a little unstable here in Africa. So just to let you know that. But on to the point of what Katrin was talking about. And one of the things that comes up for me immediately, and something that I think is really important to consider as we embark on this really, really huge discussion, is the difference between a safe space and a brave space. Safety is relative. And so we might be able to create a safe space with as many amenities of safety as we possibly can think of. But if somebody doesn't feel safe in this space, and I'm pointing to myself as my body, then the relative safety is going to be different for everybody. So I've noticed currently in doing this work, especially during the pandemic, that creating a brave space tends to be a way that we might look at this, maybe in a different perspective. And that perspective specifically is a brave space possibly could include a space for curiosity and empowerment. And how do we do that? What does that actually mean? How do we actually foster curiosity within ourselves and within a physical space that we're in? And how do we actually foster and encourage empowerment within that space and then beyond that space? So I like to think of a safe space is it's a good description, but what if we actually take it to a brave space? And that's my initial thoughts on it right now, and I'll stop there because I think it opens up a really interesting, well, Katrin already opened an interesting conversation, but it's a branch. It's a possible other branch of this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I love that kind of, I'm going to call it addition. It's kind of a different way of talking about it and a different, I think, really important and relevant way of thinking about it. And I wonder whether I'm, being comfortable and brave enough in today's times, I think that's hugely challenged at the moment. I'm noticing that. And, we've lived through a pandemic just now. There's climate change disasters heading our way, and there is a war going on at the moment. There is a lot of suffering that is not being reported on in the world, but we know about it, and it's bringing that up to the surface. And it's been going on for actually quite some time, as we all know, and it seems to be really like boiling. And if I took all of that to one side, I think there is even a development simply in the modern lifestyle in the West alone that's already changed so much, that is causing quite a lot of challenge. I work with a bunch of young people at the moment, and they are in their early 20s, and they are dealing with extreme stress and so much anxiety and extreme back pain, at the age of 23, 24. And I'm generalizing this hugely, but 20 years ago when I was 24, I feel like, yes, we had our challenges, but it wasn't anything like this. Things have changed massively. The pressures of the Western modern lifestyle alone are already too much and overwhelming. And then on top of that, we are being asked to navigate really difficult events unfolding all around us. And so that space inside as well as out doesn't really seem very inviting for braveness or feeling comfortable in our own skin to make decisions, to take action, to be curious, to see anything through, to go anywhere, to do anything, because it is like a constant kind of swimming upstream, it seems, without really getting anywhere. And I can really see how many might just say, you know what, I can't really be bothered to be swimming upstream all the time. Just, I'm going to stop for a moment, or I'm just going to stop because it's too hard. It's too difficult. Amalia, do you want to maybe say anything else on that?
Yeah, first, hi, I'm Amalia. Very happy to be here with all of you. Thank you so much for being here. I've been a social worker in the United States for the last 10 years, so swimming upstream is not an unfamiliar concept. And yeah, just from a personal perspective, like I'm there right now, it's just, I'm exhausted, right? And I think that when we talk about creating safe spaces, right, we sort of often forget the person that's holding the space, which is a very important part of the equation, because if that person isn't well, the space isn't going to be safe. Or brave, right? It's going to be difficult to hold. I worked with young people for a long time too, Kat, and for the first 5 years of my career, and teenagers, mostly adolescents. And yeah, I mean, I was the end of the technological, I think I got Facebook with my college email address, right? Like our childhood was not, there was some television and Blockbuster, and you went and rented the videos, but it was not what they're dealing with today. And the story I usually tell is I had a group of teenage boys. I was doing suicide prevention with adolescents for a while, and I had a group of teenage boys that kept coming in with very similar presentations, right? Which was like a lot of time on the screens, video games, no social interaction, right? And really, really, really depressed. And I was like, right, we're going to do a group. And if looks could kill, that first week, I would have absolutely not been alive anymore. They were so mad at me, that was the last place they wanted to be. And then by week 6, they wanted to go on field trips. They were exchanging phone numbers. I wasn't hearing about suicide anymore, and that's just to say that is not to minimize, or, it's extraordinarily serious and needs to be taken that way. But yeah, the technology is great when it's used to create community. But I think that I think what we're seeing a lot is young people feeling a lot of despair and hopelessness, and really, really needing spaces to connect and right. And so it's because it's very easy, if you spend all your time on the media right now, to just completely go into despair. And for me, one thing I've seen over and over again is what counteracts that is human connection and a reminder that we're not alone. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that story. And to me, that's really showing how really there is this bridge, right, between not feeling that safe space inside here in my own body, but how, as the facilitators, we might be able to support a kind of finding that. And so baseline, there is a lot that goes into that, a lot more than just creating the external safe space. There's a lot that goes into that. And I think without creating or doing our very best to create a safe space, at least on the kind of outside, as best as we possibly can, without doing that, we're going to find it even more difficult to support people finding back to their inner comfort and bravery. Hannah, you work a lot with people dealing with anxiety and depression and PTSD. Can you maybe, I mean, that's like a whole 3-week training in its own right, but in 3 minutes, maybe give a little overview of what that actually means, this overwhelm, when people feel extremely stressed or anxious from a nervous system point of view. What actually happens there? I think it might be quite good for us to have a little reminder of that at this point.
Hi everyone, thanks for being here, thanks for having me. So gosh, so much that could be spoken to here, and also kind of wanted to go back to some of the things you said, Kirsten, and you, Amalia. And I do just want to say that I think existing at the moment is a brave thing to do. Just to go back to what you were saying, Kirsten, because it does feel like that at the moment. It feels very brave just to be existing, and everything can feel incredibly overwhelming. And also just to note, because of that, most people are kind of living in this kind of activated sympathetic state most of the time now. Like, we've gone past, I think, potentially people kind of feeling like levels of anxiety and then going back down away from that, and people are quite often living in like a chronic state of anxiety. I see it a lot in classes, in people that I'm working with, and even we kind of think about when we're working with people in this capacity, like, vulnerable people versus the general population, but I just do think now the general population are feeling chronic anxiety and chronic stress and depression a lot more than what we'd consider somebody is vulnerable. So essentially what that means is that you're living in your kind of sympathetic nervous system rather than your parasympathetic most of the time, and you have this baseline that you can go back to. So I'm sure you guys all know about the different branches of the nervous system, and to get yourself back to that baseline takes time and it takes work. And there's lots of different ways that you can help yourself do that. And the more that you do that, the more that you'll tone your nervous system, the more that you'll create heart rate variability, be able to kind of, bring yourself back down to that rest and digest feeling of groundedness, feeling of calmness. And that sort of, it's linked with the vagus nerve and vagal tone, polyvagal theory. I don't know how many of you know about that, but the more that we activate our vagus nerve, which is a cranial nerve, it's the 10th cranial nerve, by really simple things such as just calming, diaphragmatic breathing. One of the most amazing things to work with trauma is a little bit different. It's better to do the kinds of things that Katrin was doing at the beginning of this class, like grounding, orienting yourself in a space, breathing with people that have some level of trauma, with, I don't know, people that are just feeling overwhelmed. That can be a really quick and easy way to activate the vagus nerve and can really ground somebody. If somebody's already feeling unsafe in their body, breathing and really sensing into the breath can actually make them feel sometimes more unsafe. So grounding can be just such an amazing way to work with people. But yeah, grounding and breath work, especially kind of diaphragmatic calming breath, immediately kind of sends those afferent nerves, nerve fibers up to the vagus nerve, and will just almost immediately calm yourself down. And the more that you do that, the more you can go to this baseline, and the more you can access that when you need to. I could say quite a lot more on this, but I won't. I guess the only other thing I wanted to say was just knowing these things. I think for anyone who works with people, whether, I don't know, like where you guys all come from or what you're doing in your practice, whether you're just yoga teachers. I come from a yoga teacher background. So it's something that I think is so vital because of what I was saying, like so many people are having this presentation in a day-to-day environment and in these classes that you might go into and not even realizing that you're working with somebody that has this presentation. And that's why it's so key to know this kind of stuff. Like, it's when it comes away from I'm teaching you yoga and I'm working with an individual with all of these different layers and all of these different complexities. So just a reminder of, it is brave to live in this world and we're all experiencing this on a different level. So to know these small little things that you can do when you're working with people, or little kind of things to remember, or just, language, and we'll go into this anyway, I'm sure Katrin's going to cover it, but these are just key whenever you're working in a group of people that could potentially be presenting with this or experiencing it.
Thanks, Hannah. I know that was a big question. Thank you for explaining that so well. And on the back of that, it made me think of a couple of things. One is like how you were saying, it's kind of moving from you're teaching a yoga class as an example, or whatever you do, you're facilitating that, versus kind of coming into the idea of you're working with an individual who might be living with X, Y, and Z challenge. And that is not really about people who are facilitating movement, yoga, body work, or anything else, making that a conscious transition and wanting to sort of focus in on a particular group of people. That is what you are doing by default. That is the definition of being a yoga teacher, of being a movement facilitator. You are working with individuals, and they might or might not be presenting with some of these issues going on for them, and it's not tattooed on their forehead. So there is a kind of baseline that I think comes as a responsibility to all of us who are facilitating this work in some way or another. And then, if you choose to and feel drawn to, that's your passion, to then actually direct your work to support these people specifically, then that is another opportunity. And the other thing that kind of really came to mind, what you were saying about these little exercises and the breathing. So that would actually be, in my mind, already be one aspect of creating a safe space in your general facilitation of your work, that you have these resourcing tools available, that you know them, well, for yourself, but actually also to offer them to your clients and to your students at any time, but maybe even as, again, the kind of foundation laying. So people can walk away and take these little resourcing tools, you know, put them in their bag, into their pocket, whatever, and have them available at any time that they want to use them. So you're already empowering them a little bit with having these tools available. It's a tiny little thing, and can already make people maybe feel more comfortable coming to your class, to your sessions, because they know that you have the knowledge and the tools to support them should they feel more anxious or something coming up for them, that you're giving these ideas away and that they're easy to do, that they can do that at any time, and that they don't have that feeling that they're going to rely on you, because that would just be the worst case scenario. They can only regulate their nervous system if you were there, and you can't be there everywhere at all times. It's impossible. And speaking to that, and Hannah, you mentioned this already, it's not always so obvious, you know, on if people are presenting with maybe, let's say, anxiety. Maybe Kirsten, would you maybe want to speak a little bit more to what trauma behavior might look like, what might be noticeable, what are some kind of signs to, and again, that's a huge list, but maybe, you know, 2 or 3 that are maybe also presenting most of the time, little things that we can look out for in class or in session.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kat. Yes, that's a really big, it's a really big topic. But I think one of the ways I can kind of generalize this in respect for time is we might notice 2 ends of the spectrum in any way that trauma might manifest or present itself. And this can go from 2 ends of the spectrum of life choices to possibly mood. And we might notice that somebody is possibly really exhausted in our classes all of the time, or super, super hyper. And these are 2 ways that that trauma can definitely present itself or show itself in our space. Another way might be hyper or hypovigilance. So being really, really aware of surrounding areas, noises, wondering where does that door lead, always checking for an exit. That's hypervigilance. Or hypovigilance is the opposite, really not noticing or caring if there's an exit, being able to possibly tap into that innate self-preservation that our nervous system naturally happens or naturally supports. And so they might be sort of, I don't want to say carefree, but really no ability to notice if they're possibly not in a safe space, if that makes sense. So I usually tend to try and be attuned to extremes, one end of the other. And again, these might also be ways that trauma is not manifesting, because we might not know everything about every single student in our space, or every single participant, or every single person that we're coming across. But these are ways that we can kind of generalize and look at how trauma might present, is these 2 sides of the spectrum. I know that's very, very general. And another way, and something that I've noticed, and Kat and I have talked about this quite frequently, is, and Hannah, you already brought this up, is people are living in a constant state of anxiety, right? A constant state of sympathetic nervous system overload. And it's very difficult to go, if you're already at sympathetic, right? Then where can you go from there? Freeze. So then we get into a parasympathetic nervous response that is actually something that saves our life. But unfortunately, right now, our freeze state is making it very difficult for us to find a place within ourselves to be curious and try new things. Hence, we might not commit to anything. We might have difficulty actually being connected to other people, even if we want to be, making those human connections that are so important to trauma resolution. And so that's something else that we might look for, is this inability or no capacity, I don't want to say inability, but no capacity to make any decisions right now. And this is something that's been really prevalent. And unfortunately, I anticipate seeing it more, especially with all of the turmoil happening in Russia and Ukraine, and how much of that we are experiencing as humanity. And so that's another way that we might, it might manifest physically. You might see like a state of freeze, or it might manifest within our own personal choices that we're making. So I hope that's a little helpful.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you brought something up also really important, is to, yes, be really aware and have your senses on, and to not jump to assumptions and conclusions on that, because we don't know that person's story. So it's so easy to go, oh, you know, this person is kind of erratic on the yoga mat or something, and, you know, no, they must have some big trauma. And so, you know, that's not what it's about. That's definitely not what it's about. And it's maybe, you know, simply about creating a space where that is okay. If that person needs to be a little bit erratic on the mat, is that okay? I always remember there's one student who used to come to Little Yoga Space, and he was definitely showing, so something that I would look out for is also what, as an outsider, you would categorize as slightly irrational behavior, something that you think that, you know, why is this person doing that or this? For them, that's like what they need to do. And so this student was definitely kind of doing a little bit of their own thing, quite a lot on the mat, not just sometimes, but really quite a lot. But the one thing that was definitely going on was he was checking his time every 5 minutes. He was looking at his watch. And it was really interesting to observe how, you know, kind of some people and some teachers, as well as kind of the students, then started to kind of all get a little bit irritated by the whole thing. But it sort of escalated so quickly, and everybody was in a negative way co-regulating one another, and it was becoming a thing, when really all he was doing was looking at his watch, which really does not do any harm to anyone. And it was quite interesting, and I'm not to sing my own praises, you know, but I had this student also in my class, and he seemed quite fine. In fact, like, I hardly noticed that he was looking at the watch all the time. And in fairness, we had this tiny little mini, most ridiculous clock somewhere hidden in the corner where I had to go like this to even see the time. And he just needed to know what time it was. And it's like, if you put it that way, it's like, yeah, okay, so great. Like, what's the big deal? That's okay. That is what he needs right now to even be here, to show up in the first place. It took him so much to even take that step, to have the agency, to commit to that class, to leave the house, to come to this, to open up to the possibility that, you know, he'll sort of, need to go through his kind of process with it. And his kind of safety was to know what time it was, and that you could maybe leave early, or, you know, whatever it was. So it's about creating a space where things are welcome and okay. And so maybe that's kind of taking us into some of the ideas of what all of this might look like, practically speaking. As you can already tell from the conversation so far, this is a huge topic. We could be talking on each of these questions for hours, and we only have about 20 minutes. So I wanted to look at sort of 3 areas. One is how we actually present our offerings out there. Like, it kind of sort of starts before a person has even met us, in my mind. How can we create a safe space at that point already? And then looking at the physical space, the room where we facilitate our work. And there's a few things that, you know, we can do to facilitate a safer space. And then also, obviously, in the way that we are conducting our work, and definitely want to touch on language as well as one of the things. So I might actually jump in on the first thing in terms of how we present our offerings. So it's an invitation to everyone. Have a look at your website, your flyers, your listings, your Facebook, your, I don't know, wherever you advertise your work, and really look at the language that you use. Is it really clear, easy to understand? Can you make your sentences a bit shorter? Are you saying exactly what is happening in the class, or do you actually look at your description and realize, actually, my class is very different to what I'm saying here? That sounded really great at one point, but it's not actually describing what's happening. So can you add more clarity and simplicity to the information that you're providing? What pictures are you using? You know, are you wearing appropriate clothing in those pictures? Are you doing yoga in an appropriate environment? Or, you know, I do Thai massage, for example, that has a whole reputation. So if I can provide some pictures where people see that you're fully clothed and you're on the floor and it's a nice and clean and open, safe environment, and I'm fully clothed and appropriately dressed, and I'm not touching anyone in a kind of funny way. She says funny. You know, that will already install a sense of safety before that person even decides to possibly book a session with me. I could maybe even go a step further and provide a video or a blog article or a podcast or something where people could get to know me a little bit. So they're having to make this big decision over whether they might want to work with me or not. So how can I, you know, facilitate somehow them getting to know me a little bit better, and then make a decision based on that, whether they might resonate with me or not. So there is a few ways of doing that. And there's a few things not to do. There's a, you know, I don't know if that means anything, but please, please, please don't 7-step people. You've ever kind of, you know, seen those, the sort of marketing advice of like the 7 steps to enlightenment? Oh, or, you know, like these 3 steps and you'll be free of your back pain forever. I mean, who are you to say that in the first place? Like, you know, for that, it's just simply not true. It's just not true for hardly anyone. It might have been true at some point for you. Maybe you did 3 particular things to really help you manage your back pain. And there's nothing wrong talking about that. You could write a blog article, you could give an interview about, these are the 3 things that I did and that really helped me. And this is why, in my experience of it. That's fine. But it does not mean categorically that those 3 steps are going to help anyone else at all whatsoever. And it just makes you, you know, any marketing, if you read it and think, well, if I was on the receiving end of this and it would just sort of make me feel a bit yucky, you know, that kind of, then please don't do that yourself, because that's just not very safe. It's not only about whether marketing is effective or not. It's actually about, you know, we're talking in the context of safety. It's not going to make anyone feel safe. Also, you know, providing clarity on timings, pricing. Don't make people hunt for that. Be really clear, this is what it's about, and make it easy to find how to contact you. And say if there are certain elements in your work that maybe wouldn't be so clear right from the start. So if you have a yoga class, for example, but you really love using music, it's really helpful to say there will be music in this class, or, you know, whatever it might be. So anything that people might not by default expect or think would be part of it, it's really helpful to include that in your descriptions, and to then not deviate from that. You're kind of entering into an agreement here. So to say, you know, so every class we do like some warm up and some stretches, and then we come into a flow of some asana, and then we do a relaxation. But then one day you think, wow, the sun is shining, let's put on some tunes and have a bit of a boogie because I feel like it. No, that ain't any good. That is not honoring your agreement with the people who signed up to your class, expecting a warm up, a stretch, an asana flow, and a relaxation. Remember what we were saying, it takes a lot for many people to even have the agency to make that decision, that commitment to show up in the first place. And so it's really important that we honor what we said we would do. So these are just a few things, and that could take you anywhere between an hour to make some tweaks to weeks and weeks because you realize, oh gosh, I need to really look at my website and do so much work and do, you know, I want to kind of change everything and really be a lot more explicit about being invitational and welcoming and safe. So it could become a bit of a bigger project, but for sure, for starters, you know, it's worth taking an hour and reviewing your materials that you're putting out there. And if you've got any questions on that, then feel free to reach out. So let's talk a little bit about the physical space. What is it within the physical space that we could take care of? Amalia, I would assume that maybe in your work as a social worker, you were having to, I don't know what your facilities were like in in New York, and what the possibilities are, or you can speak about, you know, your work here and as a yoga teacher. But what are the things that we can make sure of in the physical space? Any thoughts on that, or anyone else really, I guess?
That was just made me reflect on some of the physical spaces that I've worked in over the last 10 years. I mean, I've done social work on the side of roads. I've done social work in malls. I've done social work in so that's the other thing is like, you know, ideally we'd be in a nice, you know, yoga space with like, and I have also been in those and I love those, you know, but I think, I think also it's, yeah, sometimes the space is what the space is, you know, we have to make do with what we have. So again, just going back to sort of my original comment is like the most important thing really being, you know, how you're doing, right. And what your energy is and you know, and what you're bringing into the space. But yeah, of course, when you're dealing with folks that have survived trauma, you're going to want to have as, like quiet and peaceful and like lovely of a space as possible. And like you sort of walked us through in the beginning, Kat, like a space where there's not a lot of like, you know, this sort of the need to you know, to anchor. I mean, I'm from New York, right? So it's also, you know, again, it's not always an option, right? But if it is an option, right, of course, finding spaces for people where they can really, where their bodies can really fully settle, especially if that's, I know that Kirsten would be able to speak much more to this probably, but where they're, yeah, so that there would be a chance at fully coming into the body. And I think that's something that I'm starting to see the yoga world and the therapy worlds slowly inch towards each other, right? Like, but it's still, you know, there's a lot of issues with talk therapy, and there's all kinds of research being done now being like, you know, if people have survived trauma, you can literally, they can be telling you their entire story, right, and not be in their body at all, right? And so not feeling it, not processing it, not moving it through, right? So it's just, yeah, so it's, I think there's the safe space in the room, and then there's the safe space of the body, right? And so if your body doesn't feel safe to come back into, right, that's sort of a different part. And I'm gonna probably defer to the other two ladies on to like talk about more specifics about that, because honestly, that was not a part of my education, and that in and of itself will tell you about the disconnect between the two worlds. So yeah, but so I think there's the space being safe, which allows more of a likelihood of the body feeling safe, right? But that second one is really is for me is where I've seen there needing to be a lot more work and information.
I think you're making a really valuable point. It just makes me think, you know, like sometimes you move into spaces and it's really not the ideal space as you would want it. But first of all, that is just my ego kicking in. For, you know, the space might well be fine, but I'm going a bit like, oh, I don't like this and I don't like this and da 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 da. So, but if we know we're going somewhere to teach or facilitate, we could possibly take an extra 10-15 minutes, arrive a bit early, so that we actually familiarize ourselves with the space and arrive there fully and get over our initial irritation, because it's really no good. And I've definitely been irritated walking in space, but then carrying it into the class, which is the most unhelpful. I could also ask certain questions up front if I really don't know the space. So what do you have available? Do you have chairs? Do you have mats? Do you, what's your ritual? Do we clean the mats? Do we, what do I need to bring? Do I need to bring anything? If I want certain equipment or whatever as part of the work, I make sure that I know that beforehand. So I'm not there empty-handed, that I don't lack something and can't provide something. So I can be prepared as best as possible, potentially, moving into spaces that we don't know, and then do the best. But then really watch yourself and how you engage with not liking something about that space. So I've definitely caught myself being all a bit irritated and then making little throwaway comments about something that isn't quite adequate to my liking. And who cares what my liking is, about the space. But I tell you why that is a problem, because that will contribute to co-dysregulating. So if I'm irritated, how am I going to hold space for everybody else in the room or for my client? So that will rub off, and that's not very helpful. And you can be as joking about it as you like, it's still not very helpful. So give yourself that time to get over it, shake it off, get over yourself. So that would definitely be one of my recommendations. Hannah, I know the use of language is something that you are really kind of aware of, especially in your work also as a yoga therapist, when people come to work with you, and being more trauma informed in the choice of language. Would you be able to speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, of course. So invitational language is the thing to remember. Everything is an invitation. Of course, you want to, get people to a point eventually where they might be kind of pushing themselves a little bit past their edge, so they increase their tolerance and their capacity. But everything is an invitation, because if you're suggesting that somebody should feel a certain way by doing a certain thing, that completely takes them out of any sense of feeling embodied, empowered. Just because one person feels a pose or a shape or a practice in one way, it certainly doesn't translate to the next person. So just being mindful of not complicating things, but giving people that agency to make a choice. Thinking about just small words that you might have heard in yoga classes previously that just won't land with everybody, with whatever that person's presentation is. And of course, like, you might not know everybody in your room, in the room, but if you don't, it's always better to just be more cautious. For example, you might have somebody with an eating disorder in your room, and if you're talking about the body being really heavy, that could be quite triggering for somebody. And it's just being really mindful of your own use of language and making it less about you, making it less about needing to perform for the people that you're teaching, and giving that over to, I'm serving these people, how will they perceive this that I'm saying? So invitational language, I think, for me is definitely the key. And just kind of like some practical things as well when you're talking to people that might have these certain different types of presentation. Speaking fairly, coherently, slowly, not leaving enough silence so that they ruminate, but also leaving space for silence as well. Like, you don't want to just talk and talk and talk and talk so people don't even have a moment to even kind of regulate their nervous system. But if you leave too much silence, that can also be really challenging for some people. And also just letting people know what you're doing, like minimizing uncertainty. So you spoke about this, Katrin. Just, if you're going to do something, that's what you do. So if you say that you're going to do something at the beginning of a practice, make sure that you actually do that, because you've created a contract with that group of people or that person. If people are laying down, like at the end of a class, and you're moving over to turn the light off and you're moving around people, that could also be really triggering. If you're walking close to somebody and then suddenly the light goes off, if they have a fear of being in dark spaces or having someone next to them, they're hypervigilant, that could also be really triggering. So just gently, softly let people know I'm walking over and I'm just about to turn the light off. And also your tone of voice as well, like speaking softly and slowly and just knowing when it's appropriate to change your tone. Just a few little pointers. I know we're running out of time, but just going back to what you kind of said, like practical things, like having your space set up. Sometimes people might find it really horrible to have someone behind them in a class. Some people like to be round, like in a semicircle. It can be just a little bit more, everyone's at the same level, rather than traditional classes where you have mats one behind each other. It depends on the space that you have. And yeah, just having enough space between people as well, because that can just be quite invasive. And another practical thing as well, just in terms of like resourcing, obviously not everyone will find the same thing relaxing, or like especially scent. Like scent is probably the biggest thing, and it's a wonderful tool for resourcing and helping regulate somebody, getting them to find a safe scent or something that helps them ground, because it kind of just immediately, activates part of the brain that like your thalamus, and then just calms you down, like more so, like quicker than any other type of kind of extraception or something that you'll be working with. And also just one point as well, I know we're talking about safety loads, but if you're actually working with a group of people or one person and you want to find out what that person's resource is, because everyone will be individual, maybe don't even say like, what's your, what makes you feel safe? Because even saying safe can sometimes be quite triggering for people. So it's like, what makes you feel calm? What makes you feel relaxed? What makes you feel grounded? And then you can actually work with that person to find out what their kind of favorite scent is, or memory or visual, that will actually help them really calm down. So just a few things to think about there.
Quite a few. That was amazing. Thank you. So many great tips and things to think about. Kirsten, I know I've taken a few of your classes, and I have noticed how you just do these few things every time in a class. So you would make sure you say your name at the beginning of the class, every class, even though I know your name by now. And there's a whole bunch of other little things that you do. Can you maybe share one or two of those and why you're doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when we're talking about, again, a braver or a safer space, we can only do so much, and listening to all the challenges, right, that we might have in some of the places that we're facilitating or offering. And a few of the things that I do, Katrin already named one. I always say my name. People might know me, but it's easy to forget a name. And if they're trying to get a hold of me or get my attention, then making sure that they know my name at the beginning of class is actually a little helpful. Also, make sure it's really helpful to orient them in the space. Let them know this door is an exit. It's locked from the inside or the outside. Give them details. That door is a closet. These windows and doors are closed for our safety. You might hear some residual noise. There's, for example, if there's construction going on, or like here, I have a lot of really loud birds. I let people know that they might be hearing that on the other end. And it might seem kind of silly, but all of a sudden, if you have somebody who's in a state of trying to find that calm or that ease in their body, and there's suddenly this really loud noise, hopefully I've preempted that there might be some residual noise. And also allowing them, and not allowing them, but inviting them to look around the space for themselves, really orient the space for themselves, and doing this every class, even if you're online, even if they're in their own space, because they might be practicing someplace that's familiar, or they might be practicing someplace in a new room that's unfamiliar. So to actually invite the turning of the head, this activates the vagus nerve, which we kind of talked about already, looking around, reminding ourselves that we're not stuck in this little Zoom box, and also reminding ourselves, if we are in an actual space, that there's an exit, and you can always, the door opens both ways. You can always leave the space, and explaining to them how that might be available to them, whether the door again is locked, or if there's somebody outside to help them if they need to leave. So yeah, I do that for every class.
Yeah, thank you. And I have to say, I want to share this, attending that class, not as somebody who is presenting any of the issues that we've actually been talking about or maybe obviously we all do to a small degree, but so I would consider myself being relatively regulated, and yet attending a class like that with Kirsten, it makes me feel more comfortable as well. It feels so good that somebody's taking that time to acknowledge this in the first place, to give that some space, and it shifts straight away something in my nervous system to then feel like, okay, this is about my practice here for the next hour or whatever, and will make it so much easier for me to commit to this practice on a regular basis. So we'll make this more sustainable in the long run, which is one of the keys in this, and that could be a whole other webinar. Sustainability. We are out of time. Thank you so much. This was such a great conversation. Thank you to Amalia and Kirsten and Hannah, who already had to jump off. I put into the chat a few bits and bobs and some links on how you can get hold of everybody. And I wanted to kind of give a little bit, everybody's got some interesting stuff coming up. Kirsten has 2 beautiful courses coming up this summer and autumn. There's a P missing in September, but you know what I mean. It's the Foundations of Ayurveda and Yoga and the Endocrine System. That runs from September to October, the other one from July and August. And the 2 websites where you can find her. So do reach out to her, and she does one-to-one work, of course, as well. Amalia is facilitating a women's coaching circle at the yoga space on a regular basis. So that might be something that you really wanted to check out. The next one is this Saturday already. So this is for those of you in Lisbon, and I put the link there. And obviously you might enjoy her yoga classes too. Hannah is very soon, it starts at the end of March, on the 26th of March. She's going to offer a 3-week series, a course effectively. It's on Saturday mornings for 2 hours each Saturday, yoga therapy for anxiety, stress, and depression. So really what we just spoke about, but applied for anyone who might feel stress and anxiety. And my links also, well, the studio, as well as Hadadi, my website, that's just me, and the language of the body, which is my take on a therapeutic and trauma-informed approach to teaching yoga. This is a 60-hour online training, continued training for yoga teachers, or movement facilitators, including a couple of guest seats for those who have a dedicated practice. It starts again on the 19th of March. That is very, very soon. It's this Saturday coming. And there are still some spaces available on that too. So feel free to reach out. The page that I copied there, hadadithaimassage.com/language of the body. It's a very, very, very long page. Apologies for that. And not really, I wanted to make sure that you really have as much information about it as committing to any of these kind of courses. It's always a big decision. So one of the main things, and it's part of making sure we're creating a safe space in the first place, also for us here, is that this training is the right thing for you right now, that I'm the right teacher, that Kirsten is the right, that we are the right teachers for you, that this is the right time, that the training itself is the right fit. So hence the quite long page. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody. Feel free to reach out to any of us, and Amalia and Kirsten already put a few more pieces there into the chat as well, where you can download the chat if you want. I'm going to do that now too, to make sure I send that out. And I will, those of you who are here, I will also send you the recording, just as well as everybody else. So that leaves me to say thank you so much to everybody here for joining, for listening, for your time, and obviously a huge thank you to Amalia and Kirsten and Hannah.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you.
Guys,
Bye bye. Take care.